What do you look for in a crime fiction festival? Bestsellers? Prize winners? A new favourite crime writer? At Gwyl Crime Cymru Festival in spring 2023, we'll be offering all of these. But much, much more will be available. Because the home of our festival is Aberystwyth, a little town with a long history and a big heart. Once home to Welsh princes, Aberystwyth is now home to the National Library of Wales and Aberystwyth University. The sweep of the town's Regency seafront pulls the tourists in from around the globe. Aberystwyth even offers the chance to watch dolphins as well as crime writers. Festival goers will be able to enjoy gourmet food and drink as well as delectable discussions of murder, mystery and mayhem. You'll find live music in warm, welcoming pubs, as well as lively discussions on our festival stage in a former music hall theatre, with plenty of authors around for lively discussions of your own. Come and get cosy with the crime. There are hidden alleys and ancient byways to explore where murders might quite easily be hidden, and a funicular railway to take you to the top of Constitution Hill, where you can enjoy the Camera Obscura. And if you stay for a few days after the festival, you will be able to enjoy the breathtaking scenery of Ceredigion. The countryside and coast can be viewed by boat or heritage train, on foot and two wheels as well as four. Whether you love exploring lush river valleys, walking unspoiled beaches, or discovering the history of this beautiful area, Aberystwyth and Ceredigion have so much to offer. So come to Gwyl Crime Cymru Festival next spring. You might just discover your new favourite crime writer, as well as your new favourite town.
Noswaith dda pawb, a chroeso i'r digwyddiad Gwyl Crime Cymru hwn. Evening everybody, and welcome to this, the last event of this year's Gwyl Crime Cymru Festival. If this is your first event, then I really hope you're going to enjoy it. And if you've watched some of our other events, as I know many people here tonight have, I hope you've really enjoyed what this year's festival has had to offer. I'm sure I don't need to tell anybody here tonight that all festivals need financial support, and we've been very fortunate this year to receive grants from Aberystwyth Town Council and Literature Wales, which have made it possible for us to put on these fantastic events. So I'd like to give both those bodies a huge vote of thanks, not just from Crime Cymru, but from our festival audiences. Diolch o galon. The strapline on our social media marketing for this festival is "Find your new favourite crime writer in Wales." And as you know, it's brought to you by Crime Cymru, the Welsh Crime Writers Collective. We've introduced our audience to quite a number of our members this week. So if you like what you've seen and you'd like to find out more about us, you can pop over to our website at crime.cymru. We've got the lovely Jackie Collins sitting in the YouTube chat room, monitoring your questions so that she can pop up and ask you later. So I'll get her to put our web address in the chat so you can find us. As befits our closing event, both our authors this evening are Crime Cymru members. And I have to say that both have been active in bringing this festival to you, so huge thanks to both of them. So let's meet them. A Swansea girl by birth, Cathy Ace ran her own marketing communications training company for a decade and travelled the world as a management trainer before settling with her Welsh husband in Canada and becoming a communications expert of a different kind, a novelist. She's the prolific author of two cosy crime series, the Kate Morgan Mysteries and the Wise Detective Agency series, as well as Standalone, The Wrong Boy, and Murder Keeps No Calendar, which is a collection of short stories and novellas for each month of the year. Cathy's had an exciting year this year professionally, as both the Kate Morgan series and The Wrong Boy have been optioned for television. And I gather that there are plans to produce The Wrong Boy as a 3-part drama in both Welsh and English, like we've seen with Hinterland and with Keeping Faith in recent times. And to add to the good news, her novel, The Corpse with the Iron Will, which she will now show to you, has recently been shortlisted for the Howard Engel Award for Best Crime Novel Set in Canada. Cathy is a former chair of the Crime Writers of Canada and Toastmaster at Left Coast Crime, one of the biggest crime fiction conferences in North America. Welcome, Cathy, and congratulations on all of that.
Hello, and thank you very much indeed. It's very exciting to be here. I can't believe this is the last session.
I know.
It's fun to be in at the end, in at the kill.
In at the kill. And I think, actually, I mentioned the strapline earlier, find your new crime writer, your favourite crime writer in Wales. I think that was you, wasn't it? Didn't you come up with that as our marketing supremo? Yes, there we go. So all thanks to Cathy for that. So on to our next author for tonight. Born and raised in Kent, Gail Williams came to Wales on the first leg of what was supposed to be a round-the-world trip. But she met the man who's now her husband and never left. Until recently, she wrangled data for a major utility company. But now she wrangles words, writing novels and editing other people's work. Gail's a very versatile novelist. Under the name Abby Barden, she writes the steampunk crime mysteries, The Aether Chronicles, which are set in a city that she tells me both is and isn't London, and feature Amethyst Forrester, who describes herself as a scientist, not a lady, and Benjamin Maker, a member of the aristocracy. In the first book of that series, Amethyst and Maker are put in an impossible situation when they jointly inherit a house, its contents, and the mystery of the owner's murder. So rush off and buy those. Under her other writing name, G.B. Williams, Gail's had a busy few years. She's published the Locked trilogy, Locked In, Locked Up and Locked Down, featuring prison officer Ariadne Teddington and ex-cop and convicted murderer Charlie Bell. She's also published The Chair, a standalone novel set in North Wales. And on Monday, the 2nd, her most recent novel, Breaking Free, which she is now waving to the world, was published. Breaking Free is the first half of a duology, which isn't a word I get to say a lot. And I know that once people have read Breaking Free, they're going to be champing at the bit to read the sequel, Play the Game, which I think is scheduled to come out later this year again.
Later this year, yeah.
Fantastic. So congratulations on both of them.
Thank you. And also, happy Star Wars Day.
For those of you who are wondering what that's about, it's May the 4th be with you. So happy Star Wars Day, everybody.
But also, we are talking about strong women. So we should give a nod to Leah. After all, despite what happened to her father, her brother, and her son, and all the things that happened to her, she never gave in to the dark side. That is a strong woman.
Fair play to Leah. And as Gail says, our title for tonight is Strong Women, Strong Setting. And I think we should start off with the strong women. So, Cathy, Gail, who is your favourite all-time female protagonist? And let's keep it to crime fiction, I think. Or maybe, if you've got strong feelings, one from crime fiction and one from elsewhere. And tell us, what is it that makes that particular female character stand out for you? Cathy, let's start with you.
Well, it covers both Lady Macbeth, frankly, because she got the job done. No, I mean, there are many females who are behind males throughout.
Sorry, I think we had a bit of a technical problem there. So I'm going to get Cathy to answer the question again. Who is your favourite strong woman in crime fiction or other fiction, if you like? But I would prefer it to be crime fiction.
Have I changed my mind since I answered it the first time? No, I haven't. I do. I took auditions to go to drama college, and I used the Lady Macbeth speeches because I do think that they're wonderful. And if ever there was a criminal pushing for the deed to be done, she is the one who got the deed done. But yes, Miss Marple, an invisible elderly woman sitting there knitting up the socks as she knits up the clues to solve the problem. For me, Miss Marple is an incredibly strong female character. She's independent. She takes no prisoners. And she is the epitome of an underestimated female. And let's be honest, most females are underestimated, and the grayer my hair gets, the more I appreciate the cloak of invisibility that brings me and the way she used it. But if you want to whisk it off like Kate Morgan does, come out and solve the crime, even she puts it back on and disappears at the end. So for me, Miss Marple.
definitely. And I think that's really interesting that you have identified the strengths of Miss Marple, because I don't think most people looking at her, this little old lady, would think of her as a strong character. And we're going to be talking about what makes female characters strong later on. So Gail, what about you? Who's your all-time
favourite? As you can tell, I'm refusing to go grey. Absolutely refusing to go grey. And actually, in a way, my favourite character actually echoes Cathy's liking of Miss Marple. It's actually Agatha Raisin. And now I know she absolutely splits some people. I love her. My husband hates her. But I think she's one of these people who has actually, like me, is refusing to go quietly into old age. And we're all bumbling along, and she bumbles along, and she makes some mistakes. And she's very much in the sassy camp as well, which is something that I love. I think MC Beaton wrote her to perfection. So yeah, she's mine because she has her own strengths. She's very sassy. And I just love that will not go quietly into the night.
Excellent. And on the hair front, I can't remember who wrote the poem, but when I am old, I will wear purple. You've got one step further. You're not just wearing purple, you've got purple hair.
My husband brought me that book when I think I turned 30, and I was wearing purple even back then. I said, why wait until I get old?
Excellent, excellent. And I like those two different characters you've created, that you've nominated there, because I think Miss Marple and Agatha Raisin are quite different. They've got things in common, but they're quite different. And I want to think about that commonality in your own writing, perhaps a little bit, because you both create very different characters for your different series and different standalones. But do you think there's anything which is a common feature in the women in your book? So Cathy, is there a common feature between Kate and the Wise Ladies and the Jones women in The Wrong Boy?
Well, yes, and Welshness would be it, actually. I mean, Kate Morgan, like me, is a Welsh woman who's migrated to Canada and travels the world. The women of the Wise Inquiries Agency, they are Welsh, Irish, English, and Scottish, W-I-S-E, you see? So there's only one of them is Welsh, but they live in Wales, and they're aided and abetted or hindered by the Dowager Duchess, Althea, who is herself 1/4 English, Irish, Scottish, and Welsh, she tells us. So they are in Wales, and there's that Welshness. And the Jones women, the 3 generations of women who run the Dragon's Head pub in The Wrong Boy, are all Welsh. They're all actually born right there on the Dragon's Head Peninsula. So I think Welshness is what brings them together, generally speaking, for me, which, given that I now live in Canada, you might think is, oh, go on, put some rose-tinted spectacles on and cart them back to where you're from. But for me, I grew up in Wales surrounded by strong women. So for me, the strength that I saw in all of the women around me, I've tried to gift to the various women that I write about. And because, everybody around me was Welsh, that I think is the root cause of the strength and the root source of the strength, because that's what I know. Others might say it's the same elsewhere in the world, but for me, that's what I know. So that's where it comes from.
Okay, and we are Crime Cymru. Obviously, we are all Welsh writers, whether we're Welsh by birth, adoption, living. Yeah. What particular strength do you think being Welsh gives to a woman?
I think it's a considerable ability to just keep going. There's the just keep swimming, just keep swimming. It's just keep going. You get knocked down, you pick yourself up, you get back on with it. You get knocked down again, you pick yourself back up, you get on with it. And of course, in life, that's critically important, but it's also critically important in solving crime, albeit they fictional ones, because you are set off on red herrings or dead ends, and you have to keep refocusing on the problem that you're facing. So I think the doggedness, I will not accept being beaten. I will get up and I will do my best, and I'll give it 200% until I know I've done the best I possibly can. That's the strength that I grew up being taught about, and that's what I try to give all my characters, my female characters anyway.
Okay, brilliant. Gail, is it something similar for you with Amethyst, Ariadne, and all the other characters?
It is similar, but actually it's also quite different because you should probably tell from the accent. I grew up in the southeast of England, so I was in and around London at the time of yuppies and women power and shoulder pads and all of that. And actually, I think my characters are a bit of a rebellion against the strong women that I grew up with, because I didn't like the way that those women were strong. They were powerful, but they were also loud and brash and actually quite inconsiderate, because it all moved into the ladette. And once you got into the ladette culture, I was really uncomfortable with that. But absolutely is definitely a Welsh thing, but it is a thing from my family as well. The women are the ones who do get up, they do carry on, they do make sure that whatever the mess is, your problem you solve your problem and you move on. And if you don't solve it, you still have to move on. You don't give up. I think that is something that is actually in all of my characters. Certainly in Ariadne, she was nearly floored by what happened to her, which I won't give away for people who haven't read it. Similarly with Branwen, she was actually trapped by what happened to her. And with Elaine in the new book, it's actually, the reason it's called Breaking Free is because she is breaking free of the things that have kept her trapped for 25 years. And that's the bit that I tend to focus on. I like to see the women who are strong inside, because you have to be strong inside to start to even try to break out. But it is that changing from being the trapped little mouse and contained within your soul, your marriage, your village, whatever it is. They've all been trapped by something. And throughout the books, it is those women coming to their own strengths that actually I find the most interesting. But it is, as Cathy said, it's that family, it's that carry on. I think the word you used was doggedness. And I think that's something quite common to a lot of strong women in literature, whatever the genre.
That's great. And I really did like that about the women in your books, because it's almost as if the books come to them at the point when they are just thinking, I've got to break out for whatever reason. I can't go on living like this. So
yes.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And we will talk more about Elaine in the new book in a bit. But to come back to something that you just said, there were things you didn't want to represent in your fiction.
Yeah.
One of the things that we don't often see in British crime fiction is the kind of thing that Stieg Larsson did with Lisbeth Salander, that very kick-ass, black belt in karate, trained with Mossad to do Krav Maga. Would either of you be interested in writing that kind of heroine, Cathy? What do you reckon? Very different to your women, definitely.
Very different to what I do write. I mean, Kate Morgan uses her brain to solve crimes. She's got an eidetic memory. She's a member of Mensa. She's incredibly bright. She uses her academic abilities and knowledge applied to real life that she finds herself having to face up to. So in that respect, she's more like the Doctor in that she uses a screwdriver, not a gun. And I think, therefore, that unless she actually has to retrieve herself from a situation, I know in the first book, and quite often, she's had to use a form of violence in order to escape from a particularly dangerous situation. But that really is an extremist. Kate is very much more, she will work her way out of it. She will think and talk her way out of it, rather than beating or kicking or fighting her way out of it. And I prefer to write that type of character rather than an action-based character. However, I do enjoy reading action-based characters. There's an incredible skill involved with writing action scenes, and I'm not entirely sure that I possess that skill. A bit like writing sex scenes. I don't think I could write those either, because I'd be like, inside me, I'm still the 12-year-old girl. But for me, that's not the area that I would naturally go towards. So I'll stick with the brain, and I'll stick with opening doors with keys rather than kicking them open, for me.
Yeah. Before I come on to you, Gail, to answer the same question, Cathy, you mentioned Kate's eidetic memory, and I know sometimes people will say to her in books, oh, you've got a photographic memory. Can you tell me what the difference is between those two terms, photographic memory, eidetic memory?
It's just a layman's term for an eidetic
Okay.
memory. An eidetic memory is a memory that captures things,
Right.
and most people would refer to it as a photographic memory.
Okay.
Of course, the thing is with an eidetic memory is you can always also have an eidetic memory for other senses as well. Not just what you see, but what you hear, what you smell, what you feel, all of those sorts of aspects as well.
Fantastic. Thank you for the explanation. Gail, have you got any aspirations to write kick-ass females? I mean, Ariadne's a little bit kick-ass, isn't she?
Ariadne is a bit kick-ass, she's a female prison guard in a prison. She kind of has to be.
Yeah.
Actually, yes, I do. I'm halfway through a standalone that I've written. I've actually stopped because I'm not overly happy with what I've done. And the heroine in that is very much she's an ex-army officer. She's left the army for reasons that basically the sexism. So she got fed up a bit and left. But what I found with her, what I don't like writing, and what you often do see with kick-ass sassy women, so for example, somebody like Stephanie Plum, they're on the hero's journey, and I like to write the heroine's journey. And there's a big difference in what you can do with a character on those two journeys. So yes, I'm trying to write a kick-ass character who's that and sassy and has all that training and has all that physical knowledge, how to shoot guns and all the rest of it, that, you know, that kind of stuff that I don't have. But I'm not finding it a very satisfying story at the moment. I that's why I've left it for the time being, because I like to write the heroine's journey. I like that, the interaction and the intelligence, emotional intelligence, as well as mental intelligence. I actually quite like that. So I would like to write a more kick-ass woman who is like Mrs. Bond, but it's just not happening at the moment, I'm afraid.
It's interesting, isn't it? We can all only write what we can write. I think there's a tendency for people to think, oh, you could write anything. If you're a writer, you can write anything. It's just not true, is it?
No. Absolutely not. Oh my goodness, no.
What I do find interesting, though, is the number of crime writers who write children's stories.
Okay.
Because there is a very similar story pattern. I mean, obviously the famous one is Chitter Chitter Bang Bang and Bond and 007, both by Ian Fleming. And, you know, Roald Dahl, you ever read The Tales of the Unexpected and any of the Roald Dahl children's books, you're like, oh my God, yes, they are actually written in the same way, just for different audiences. So I find there's something I would love to do, because I can't write for children. I have tried. My husband keeps saying to me, can you write something nice with fluffy bunnies? And every time I try it turns out to be a vivisection holding. So I would like to try to write something different, but I don't feel it. And I don't and if the writer doesn't feel it, the reader's not going to feel it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, okay, let's just come on a bit to look at what you actually write and your most recent books, because I'm hoping that most people watching probably haven't read them yet. So, Cathy, Kate Morgan, as you've just said, is a psychologist. So tell us what she's up against in The Corpse with the Turquoise Toes. What's she using her skills for in this particular book?
Well, can you see this cover, folks?
Very lovely.
That's better, right?
Yeah.
As you can see, the cover shows the desert, okay? These are Segura cacti. So she's actually in the desert, the Sonoran Desert. She begins her trip in Phoenix. Perhaps for people who know nothing about Kate Morgan, I should explain. She lives and works just outside Vancouver in Pacific Northwest Canada. But each book is set in a totally different location, with a whole different set of characters. This particular book finds her rushing off in a private jet, no less. How exciting is that? To a swanky new restaurant and a boutique resort in the Sonoran Desert, just beyond Phoenix, where she and her husband, Bud Anderson, who is a Swedish-born Canadian retired police detective, they are going to be treated as guests of honor at the opening of this restaurant. Well, of course, in Kate's world, nothing ever goes as planned. Generally speaking, the titular corpse of every Kate Morgan mystery is dead. by the end of page 2 or 3. So Kate actually is forced into a situation where she has to solve that mystery. And there's a contract, between the writer and the reader, and we all suspend disbelief sufficiently to know that Kate is not Typhoid Mary, although frankly, I would never book a boarding pass on a plane that she's getting on. But this one, she's in the middle of the desert at what turns out to be what she quite clearly diagnoses as being the headquarters of a cult. And within that situation, it's very difficult for me to say more other than there are a number of corpses, other than the corpse with the turquoise toes, who happens to be one of the women who established the cult. And her daughter has now taken over the mantle. The mother is dead at the beginning, the father having predeceased her by a year, and the daughter is now running this very cultish, darkly atmospheric situation where Kate feels compelled because she's very upset by the way that grief is being traded on within this cult. So she feels compelled to work out exactly what's going on and how it's happening and why it's happening. This one isn't a whodunit. We know who's doing what pretty much from the beginning of the book. It's a how done it and a why done it. So it's quite different. The mystery is in a different part of the story. So I've sent her off somewhere nice and warm, which she's not enjoying because she's having hot flashes. Ha ha. Finished mine. She can have it now. And I thoroughly enjoyed writing it because I did, in fact, encounter the cult that I've based this upon in real life. So it gave me a chance to share my cultish insights, as well as Kate's role as a professor of criminal psychology being put to use in this particular situation.
Oh, that's interesting.
I have to say,
ask you. Sorry,
I was just going to say, I've been reading that, and that cover is brilliant for it because you really bring the colours alive. But that cult I'd run the first time, they like to hug people. And she's like, no, keep away.
Oh, they do. And hugging's taken on a whole new spin in the past couple of years, hasn't it? Okay, so hugging didn't have that sort of weight. It didn't carry that weight at the time that I encountered them, but it was when the pandemic was breaking out. So what seemed relatively innocent to begin with took on really sinister and frankly terrifying overtones. The more and more I saw them doing it, it was like, I wouldn't be doing that if I were you. And just the whole concept of hugging is so uncomfortable now. But the way they did it was just uncomfortable anyway. And I don't want to say too much about them, but just the whole hug for a minute is just, 55 seconds too long, you know?
I'm concerned it's 60 seconds too long. I've never been a hugger, and I just find it a bit...
Well, I know I am a hugger, but a minute, it felt like abuse right from the beginning.
Yes,
do you know what I mean? But I was going to say, you mentioned that you'd come into contact with a cult. Is all the stuff in the book from that? Or because it felt like you must have done a lot of research.
I did. It's not all from them. I've drawn in a couple of threads from others where I've done a bit more research into other fields. But the high points of what they do are very much based on what I saw and learned about them at the time. Yes, but I've made it much more specific to this application. So it's not all of what I saw. But unfortunately, there were losses of lives involved, and it was the whole thing was incredibly worrying. But there we are.
Yes, and you conveyed that worry really well in the book. I thought it was great. I really, really, really liked it.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I did.
If you can say you enjoy it.
Yes.
So long as comeuppances, very important to me. Comeuppances are very important.
Absolutely.
Critical for comeuppances, however that might reveal itself.
Yes, and very satisfying, absolutely. So Gail, breaking free. In the second chapter, somebody searching Elaine Blake's house says that she must be the most boring person in the world ever. Now, the reader's already met her, so we know that's not true, because we've seen her interacting with her friends. But it's a bold thing for a writer to allow a character to say about their main protagonist. So, okay, tell us a bit about Elaine and the predicament she finds herself in and why you presented her as this boring person.
Well, one of the things I think makes her strong is she's actually very much an every woman. She she's married, she has a job, she's been a foster mother, and there are reasons why she's a foster mother and not a mother, which actually do come out during the book. And she's lived a very suburban life. Nothing out of the ordinary has ever happened that anybody knows about. And you're talking about the man searching. He's an MI6 spy. So he's used to women who are strong and adventurous and we're here, there and everywhere, and they get involved in politics and all the rest of it. And she's not like that. And he can't see anything like that. When he says that point, and it is the opening line of chapter 2, he has basically gone through her entire house. He has found not one single dust bunny, which I have to say is very much Elaine, not me. Everything's got a place. Everything is in its place. There's nothing out of the ordinary. There's not even a lot of books in the house. There is one interesting item that is discussed, but I'll leave the readers to find that. So that is what he sees. He just sees this boring woman with nothing to tell. She doesn't go out socially very much. She isn't a member of any clubs. And that's all he sees. But then through the rest of the book, and I think it's by about chapter 5, he's seen that there is this whole other side of her that she has been hiding from the world, hiding from him. And once he sees that, he's just completely thrown for a loop, because he's a man who usually can sum people up in 2 seconds, and he can't with Elaine Blake, and it really throws him. He just doesn't know where to go. So.
No, and it throws him for almost the entire book, doesn't it? He keeps underestimating her again and again and again and again. It's almost like he can't break out of that initial assumption. She's very boring. There's nothing to her. She's almost like a non-person.
Yeah, he refers to her as a mouse quite a few times, he can't reconcile the woman that he's been sort of overseeing for 25 years from a distance, and this woman he's now dealing with, who's basically running rings around him.
Yeah, absolutely. But I love the way that the reader gradually finds out what's been going on and how come she presented this very bland and boring picture of herself to the world and what's really going on. And because it's a duology, even by the end of the book, we don't really know everything that's going on. And I'm desperate to find out what on earth's going on and what happens next. But time is going on. So we should really think about the other half of our title and the strong settings. So I think using the setting as a hook you've done very overtly, Cathy, as you've just explained. Every time, in every Kate Morgan mystery, they're in a new and usually quite exotic location, which I have to tell you was fantastic in the pandemic, because we couldn't go anywhere, but we could read Kate Morgan books, and suddenly we were here. It was fantastic.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Alice. That's why I really put my back into it. And I published 4 during the in the past 2 years. There've been 4 new Kates, and you've got all over the world with her.
Absolutely,
so
fantastic. Yes, no, that's really great. And similarly with the wise women, they investigate in various places, don't they?
Yes.
What do you think strong settings like that bring to a crime novel?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned both, because I think strong settings can work in 2 very distinct ways, and I've tried to use them in both ways. So the Kate Morgan mysteries, each one is in a different location. I try to use the strength of that by taking readers to that location and allowing that story could only happen in that particular place. Now, that's an unusual way for traditional mysteries to work. And if you think about it, if you take the Agatha Christie view, Poirot would travel to different places. Miss Marple tended to be in the domestic village setting. And that's what I've done with the wise women, because there is another type of strength with going to a recurring setting, where in the wise women, you've got the village of Anwen by Wye, but you've also got the stately home of Chellingworth Hall. And you've got the environs of some of which are real, like Bilth Wells and Brecon, although Anwen by Wye and Chellingworth Hall are fictitious, they are within a real landscape. And the difference there is that you've got recurring characters about whom you learn more and more and more through each book. And I like revisiting characters when I read, and I like revisiting characters when I write. So in a way, the characters become stronger because the setting is revisited. Whereas with the Kate Morgan mysteries, the characters are stronger because there's a higher level of risk, because you know you're not going to go back to them, and therefore there's more chance that they might actually pop their clogs in that book, because I'm not going to need them for the next one. And that's the thing, you're unlikely to lose the lovable pub landlord who's whining and dining one of your detectives in a place where you're going to keep revisiting. So there's less risk possibly associated with those characters not making it to the end of the book. So the setting can lead to character development, character potential, and I do think the setting can become a character in itself when you're revisiting it, or allowing the whole story to take on a particular tone because of the specific setting that you've chosen at the time. So the Kate Morgan mystery set in Jamaica, very much using the Bond and the Captain Henry Morgan mystery, the lost treasure, and that's got a very Caribbean flavour to it that could only come from the mystery taking place on that specific island. So horses for courses, but the reason I like doing both is because I think setting can do different things. So I'm being greedy and trying to do everything.
Well, why not? And what about the setting of Rosraig in The Wrong Boy?
Well, that was influenced by Rhossili in South Wales on the Gower Peninsula, where there is a phenomenal headland, Worm's Head, and it's a very insular place. It's interesting to me that I wanted to bring that sense of isolation, that sense of there's only us and the sea, to a book, and I wanted that isolation to become a character in its own right and to influence all the characters who live in that village. It's not Rhossili at all. It's much more menacing. But the concept of we're on the end of a bit of land that's on the end of another bit of land, there really is nothing around us, and we're so distant that we could all drop off into the sea and no one would notice, but we will. And I wanted, therefore, the idea of gossip within a small community and how vitriolic that can become to be set against the idea that social media is like local vitriol on steroids, and how the huge view can affect the small and the small can impact the large. So for me it was inspired by it, and really quite the insular closed nature of it was important to me.
Yeah, and you do create that kind of claustrophobic society really well. And in claustrophobic societies, gossip develops a currency that it never develops elsewhere, and it's toxic, isn't it? So
absolutely toxic. And you're speaking about escape, Gail. There is no escape.
Exactly.
These people, there's not even a concept of escape. This is it.
Yeah.
In fact, there are incomers who've been there for 30, 40 years who are still the outsiders, really.
Yeah.
They'll never be accepted. But if you're born there, that is your life. One tried to escape. See how well that went.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And Gail, I mean, Cathy has just mentioned her different approach to setting in the Wise Inquiry Agency and the Kate Morgan mysteries. And I think you do something a little bit similar, because in the Locked trilogy, you've got what you might call micro settings, a prison, very small setting, very claustrophobic again, the bank where the hostage situation is taking place. Whereas in The Chair and Breaking Free, you've got a much wider geographical setting, although even between those two books, it's different.
Well, I'd say there's obviously the wider geographical setting definitely within Breaking Free, because, just look at the cover. She ends up at the Eiffel Tower. And that is part of her breaking free, is actually learning to travel. But actually, in many ways, in The Chair, Branwen is actually... she is imprisoned, in fact, by Cadair Idris and by Penicum, the village that she lives. So it's kind of a halfway home, because, as you say, I start with a prison in Locked Up, and if you want to see claustrophobia and know where to escape, that's your book to read. So there's no getting out for Charlie Bell from there. He has to stay in there, and he has to live there, and he has to deal with it. Then you've got Branwen Jones in Cadair Idris, and she has been trapped there, and she knows she's got to break out. She doesn't break out in the way she thought she was going to, but she has to move away for it. And then you've got Elaine. She is actually literally, she just walks out of her house and she travels. And other than obviously, she goes to France because you can't ignore what's on the cover. That's all I'm prepared to say at the moment. She travels and she does learn so much about herself in the travel. And I think that's one of the things that location gave me, is where she goes in this and where she goes in the next book as well. I've been to quite a lot of those places, and they are alien to somebody, particularly when I was traveling alone before I met my husband. It's a very different view, and it is. I don't know if I've ever achieved that setting as character. I would love to know. If I do, I would love to actually achieve it. But I think with all of the environments, wherever you write, whatever you write, you have to interact with what's around you. You don't have a choice. Particularly when you're thrown into a foreign land and you don't speak the language, which is where Elaine is when she ends up in France, because she doesn't speak French at all. There is one thing I will share. This actually happened to me, and the reason that I put this in the book, because I actually did it. She turns around to a French woman and says, "Sprechen Sie Anglais," which is German. And it's like, how can you be so dumb as to ask a French person in German if they speak English? And it's that kind of interaction with the environment, and just saying, this is all new to me. How do I deal with this? What am I going to do? And I think that's what going to these different environments can give you. It's all very well having the locked room, but eventually you've got to walk outside.
Yeah. Okay, great. I'm very aware that we're heading towards the time when we need to go for audience questions, but I'm just going to ask one more question, which kind of brings the strong women and the strong settings together. So you've got when you start off your book, you've got your characters, you've got where they're going, but in terms of plot, do you know where they're going? So have you got a map of your book before you start, or are you making it up as you go along? Cathy, start off with you.
Oh God, I'm completely OCD about plotting. You know what? I have to say, I have admiration for pantsters. Those people who write by the seat of their pants. I don't know how they do it. I have no idea how they do it. I know exactly what's happening, to whom, exactly when. I plot, I research, I outline, I do chapter outlines, I do, the whole thing is done before I begin writing the book. So for me, physically writing a book is when I sit down and start doing this. This is my husband's impersonation of me writing a book. Because that's what I do at night, all night, through the night, because it's all already in my head. Okay. I develop the whole plot as though it's a movie in my head. And I take that forward and take it forward. I ask the questions, I answer them, I push it through scene by scene. So by the time I sit down to write the book, I've seen the whole movie in my head. And my job is to get that movie onto the page without the words getting in the way. Because I want people to not feel as though they've read my book, but I want them to feel as though they've experienced the story that I'm telling. Mm. That's my overall aim. I don't want the words to get in the way, but it all has to go exactly as I say. People say what I tell them to say, when I tell them to say, and do exactly what I tell them to do. It's the only part of my life in which I'm in control. Please let me have that. Please. I'm a strong woman. I deserve it.
Do you know, that's the opposite. I was listening to a crime fiction podcast earlier on, and I heard, they were interviewing Shariat LaPena, and she is the opposite. She's a complete pantser, so she doesn't plan at all, but she said it's the only part of her life which isn't planned to within an inch of her life. The rest of her life is organised by 5-year plans and 1-year plans and spreadsheets and lists, and she said, but I just cannot do it with regard to my writing. Really
the rest of my life is complete chaos.
So you're the opposite. Interesting.
That's why it's the only thing I'm control of.
Gail, what about you? Are you plotter or pantser?
I know you're a pantser, and obviously Cathy is a planner. I'm actually the halfway point. Okay. And I will say that this does come from my life as well, because my husband is a shift worker. So I've always had to be flexible in every plan that I make, just in case. And because he's a key worker as well, if he gets called into work, that's it. He goes into work, and the rest of the the life has to flex around it. So I have a plan. I know how I'm going to start, and I think I know how I'm going to end. And then I start writing, and my characters go off and do whatever they want to do. And sometimes I let them.
No.
So if you look at the Aether Chronicles, for example, the idea was she and Maker, and then it doesn't. Something else happened. Somebody else turned onto the page. And it all just went very differently to how I was expecting it. So with all of the crime novels, however, because you have to have a modern day understanding of forensics and that kind of thing, there is a little bit more planning. But I'll often suddenly think, oh, what? How would you actually solve that one? What piece of evidence can I go and find out? But it doesn't necessarily turn up in the place I want it to turn up. Sometimes I had to change it. I'm in the middle of writing a short story. My original idea was that the particular character would have had a stroke, but then I looked at what would happen with that particular medication, and it's a convulsive seizure. So even that, and I'm only 2,000 words in, and even that's already had to change. As I've written it, something else came along. So I do plan a certain amount, but I certainly don't go into the detail of chapter planning. I find that my characters come alive more if I let them have their own head. Sometimes I have to bring them back, and I just delete whole chapters and say, "You're not doing that after all, madam." But generally, I let the characters and their character inform what I'm writing. And if it doesn't feel natural, I have a couple of times I have tried to force them into areas, and then you get to that way, and it just think, no, this doesn't work. It doesn't work for me. It's certainly not going to work for the reader. And if it doesn't work for the character, it's not right. You just have to, okay, if you want to go, take a left turn when I wanted you to go right, let's go and have a look what's down the left-hand path. And so I let them.
Absolutely. Welcome to my world. That's how I read the whole book.
And I let them do that, but I let them do that in my head in
Right.
the movie running before I start to write. Because I would rather the writing be right, because they've done the false paths before. So you know what? It's horses for courses, right?
Everyone's different.
I've learned everybody writes the way that they write, and there isn't a right way to write.
No,
there are quite a lot of wrong ways to write, but not a right way to write.
And I think that's something really important to say to everybody listening who is trying to write. Don't try and write like somebody else. Don't look at somebody that you really admire and think, I'll write as they write. You've got to work out how you write. And I think that's something that I was doing with the first 2, 3, 4 books I was writing, is how do I do it?
Because I write in 2 different genres, I write them differently. When I write the crime, I write from the beginning of the book to the end of the book. But when I write the steampunk, if I have, because I'm awfully actually writing them at the same time, it's like, oh, I've got this idea for the steampunk scene. I'll go and write that out. Makes working on the steampunk much, much harder, because I then have to work out where that scene's going to go and how do I connect it to the previous scene, how do I connect it to the last one. So in many respects, writing crime is easier because I start on page 1 and I go through to the end. But with steampunk, as I say, if I have this idea for a good scene, I will go and write it and I'll sew it all together later. So even one writer doesn't always write in the same way.
Interesting. Okay. And there's Cathy in the middle of the night doing this. When do you write?
Whenever I've got 5 minutes.
Right, okay.
Whenever the cat will leave me alone most of the time. I've got a cat who's very, very demanding. But again, I have to work around my husband's shifts and my daughter's shifts, because he is a 24/7, 365 worker. I'll have my weekends when he's got time off. So you'll often find me work. I work, for example, all through all the bank holidays, not just doing this, but I was working as well. So I will work when there's no one in the house, or even if there is people in the house. But I'll write anywhere at any time while doing anything. I've been known to sit in doctors' waiting rooms, writing on my phone. I've even been known to get an eyeliner out of my bag and write on a napkin because I've had an idea while I'm out. I'm a martini writer, anytime, any place, anywhere.
And on that note, I'm going to bring Cathy. I'm going to bring Jackie in. Jackie, are you there with audience questions, my love? I've seen the screen come up. Where is Jackie? Yay, there she is. Hooray.
Hey, can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
How's it been over there on YouTube chat?
It's been absolutely wonderful. And the first thing I'd just like to say is Philip Wynne-Jones came in as we were talking, or you were talking about children's fiction writers and Roald Dahl, but they'd been mentioned about Bang Bang and Bond. And apparently he popped in the chat that Roald Dahl also scripted a Bond film.
Oh, did he?
Really?
So I love that serendipity there of the strands all coming together,
Interesting.
which is wonderful, wonderful.
And I love the serendipity that the lead character in this book is named Serendipity.
Yes.
Now, there are a number of questions, and whether you will be able to get through them all, I'm not sure.
I think we can probably squeeze an extra 5 minutes in today,
Yeah.
given that it's the last one.
Excellent. And just to say that the people gathered watching right now on both sides of the Atlantic, it's really exciting to see people checking in from Canada and the US and here in the UK. So the first question comes from wonderful Alex, and Alex asks, he loves lots of, female characters, but do the authors, do the panel have any best supporting male characters in crime fiction? And emphasis on the supporting.
In my own, yes, and it's actually Inspector Dean Jensen, but he is in the 8th Chronicles, which is crime. It's just steampunk crime. He wasn't even supposed to be in book 1, and then he just turned up and filled the page. So he is a supporting character, so I love him. But I also find with a lot of modern ones, it is the support, particularly of police procedurals. You've got to have lots of support characters around you. And they all do, they all do. The reality is that every police officer works in a supporting cast. So I'd hesitate to pick one out as my favourite. But I think, you have to have men and women there, particularly in police procedures, because the reality is we all live in a mixed world. So I wouldn't like to say I'd pick out one, but look at any good police procedure and you are going to find some really good supporting casts.
It's an interesting question because it's the classic Holmes and Watson question. It's like, how thick can you make Watson and yet still allow the reader to believe that Holmes would spend any time with him? So if your aim is to create a strong female character and there is a supporting male character, it's what is the relationship between them going to be? And I don't necessarily mean the physical or emotional relationship, but the relationship within the book, that they can support each other and give a realistic view of that interplay. And when I was creating Bud Anderson, Kate Morgan's husband, as he becomes, I wanted to make sure that he had his strengths, she had her strengths, and that she is a stronger woman because she's actually a part of a very successful partnership. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with allowing a part of a woman's strength to be the way she accepts support from a man in her life. Oh, I always find that's a difficult balance to strike.
You see, that to me is what a woman's strength is. I've mentioned the heroine's journey compared to the hero's journey. The heroine's journey is actually gathering that support and communications, and I think that's what Bud and Kate do very, very well. But I do think that's what makes a strong female character is the support network she has around her.
Which brings in, the next question is from Sue, and it just segues lovely into what you've been saying. And she asks, what do you think are the advantages of a woman detective over a male protagonist?
Oh, gosh, that's difficult because so much depends on what you see as female characteristics and how they would differ from male characteristics. In my Kate Morgan mysteries, she looks at the psychology for why things have happened. And a male would be just as capable of doing that as well if he had the training and the memory and the smarts that she has. She doesn't do anything that's particularly female that a male couldn't do. So in that respect, she is a person. And I would always rather read stories that feature people rather than necessarily focus on the ability or inability based upon a gender.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Cathy, because it is that person, isn't it? You know, it's the person that you're writing that is the most believable and works for you. So I mean, I have to be honest, as a writer, it's just easier for me to write women. However, having said that, you look at the Locke trilogy, they are all led by Charlie Bell. And so my main character was a male, and I don't have a problem with men writing women or women writing men. I think the main one of the big pluses of having a female lead is that it's still not the norm, and we still need to redress a bit of that balance. And you know, as I said, the reality is we live in a mixed world, and you have to have male and female, and it does work differently, and it's not always the male who will act in a male way, and it's not always the female who will be the more female one. I've talked about.
Sorry, can I just come in there?
Yeah.
No, I'm sure people watching, especially aspiring writers, have been fascinated by your reference to the hero's journey and the heroine's journey. Just do you want to give us a very quick summary of each?
Sure. The hero's journey is they go into a situation, they sort it out, they go away. Think Reacher. Reacher is your classic hero. Stephanie Plum is also your classic hero. When you start talking about the heroine's journey is about being in a situation that is problematic and growing and moving on through communication and network. And it's not crime, but it's a story that everybody here will know about, even if, like me, you've never read. Harry Potter is the classic heroine's journey. So it's more about the way that you interact. It's not, you know, the hero's journey could be taken by a woman, which I think is why I can't write the kick-ass woman I was talking about earlier, because it's two heroes' journey. Whereas the heroine's journey is, yes, there are problems, but you overcome it by communication and networking.
Thank you.
Gail Carragher has written a fantastic book about it. I would highly recommend.
Do you want to, yes, there's no way for you to put it in the chat, is there? Never mind, tweet it for our audience.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
It's simply called The Heroine's Journey by Gail Carragher.
There you go.
Yeah, and I can't multitask to put that in the
No,
chat.
no, Jackie, don't worry, carry on.
Yeah, and so next question comes from Jane, and I think regardless of gender here, is it essential for main protagonists to have traumatic backgrounds, and does this make them better at solving crime?
No and no.
Simple.
No, I think we often do use that past trauma. Who hasn't got their quirks? But you can have ordinary people solving crime if they're intelligent. That's works. I mean, Sherlock Holmes is a strange character, but there's no real trauma in his background. You know, he's so intelligent. Like Sheldon in Big Bang, so intelligent. They're in a flight above all the rest of us, but no trauma. So I think it makes the past trauma can make a character more empathetic when they encounter that trauma in someone else, which is very useful. But I don't think you have to have trauma, and I don't think it does make that much difference to crime solving.
I don't think you have to, but it is fun to do it. Okay. I get a bit tired of the hackneyed, yes, there's this trauma in the background, and now they're all messed up, so they drink a lot or do this a lot, or they self-medicate or this or whatever. With Kate, I gave her an abusive relationship, a man who was found dead on her floor, and she was accused of his murder, although she was cleared. But that's why she left the country. So there was an outcome of that, and it meant she built walls around herself, which Bud had to gradually break down. But it does give her a reason for being so up herself that, you know, she's really not terribly popular in terms of friends and that. And I think the way you use the trauma as you develop the character can be quite useful. And by book 12, even her husband says to her, she says, well, she misses a chance to judge someone. And he says, that's not like you. And she says, well, I'm trying to be more thinky and less judgy these days. And he said, well, if it takes, I'll be impressed. Because that's the way she's come through life. And I do think it's how you use it, because everybody has trauma in their life. And I would say, yes, Sherlock Holmes does have a very traumatic backstory, but it's how that presents itself forward, and whether the character involved has even acknowledged or noticed the trauma. And sometimes some of the most damaged people are those who didn't realize they were traumatized. And they've just
That's
reacted.
true. Yeah.
And they can become great protagonists or antagonists. So good for them. Use your trauma. Dig deep and use that trauma.
Cathy, if I can just stick with you for a minute, because Alice wanted to know, will there be any more Wise Women books?
Oh gosh, it's never say never. That's the first honest answer. I am actually toying with 2, and I can't say any more about it, but I would like to take the relationships and the people forward. It's just really a question of getting my head together and getting it on paper. There, I said it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Next question from Sue, and she says, when do you make the decision, and it's open for this one, when do you make the decision that your book would be a standalone or part of a series?
I think I let my characters choose. Charlie Bell, who is the main protagonist in the Locked series, he started out as a 200 words character sketch. And then I thought, oh no, I can do a short story out of him. And then I did a short story and thought, oh no, I could do a 10,000 word short story out of him. And then I thought, no, I've got enough here for a book. And then I wrote the book and thought, hang on, he's not done yet. He's still got more to say. So it became a trilogy. And it's an open secret that it's not going to stop at a trilogy. Charlie Bell is going to reappear. So with him, I didn't know. With Branwen and Cobb, I did know that had to sit as a standalone. Mm-hmm. And Elaine is going to be 2 books, and that is it, because that is what their story takes. So I think it's a question of what the character's story really is. Charlie's developed in ways I never expected. The 5 books of Aether, I always knew there would be 5 books of it, because I knew, again, the plot points that I wanted to hit. So I do have a series in development that I'm hoping will be that sort of like, I'll do one of them every year for the next 20 years. But whether or not I ever actually manage to sell it is another question. But to me, it's the characters tell me.
Well, as a plotter, I'm going to say, before I sit down to write the book, I knew what was standalone, what was a short series, what was a long series. But even a standalone can become, the Wrong Boy is definitely a standalone. But I will be writing a future book where the characters of Detective Inspector Evan Glover, retired, and his wife, and the police team that he left, they will be coming back, but again, almost as sort of adjunct overseers of a case rather than in the nitty-gritty of it. So, beforehand for me, different type of book. You need to know, I need to know where I'm going with it.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to squeeze one more in, if that's okay. And it's a question from Jim, which has come in while we've been talking. So I'll have to read it from small letters, but it's an interesting question. And it said, would you have any pointers for male authors writing female characters to show what to avoid, particularly if they want to write a female protagonist?
Gracious.
That's really difficult, because some authors do it really, really well. I don't have a swooning every 5 minutes at the male protagonist. But if you're not sure about that character, go and ask a woman. Get her to read the scene that you've written, and trust me, a woman, unless it's your mother, she'll tell you, no, that's not how we behave. No, I think we have to remember we're all human. So in a lot of respects, gender does not make a difference. But you have to think about things like, would you have a woman in that situation? I had to do a lot of research before I could put Ariadne Teddington into that prison, because I wasn't sure that you could have a female prison officer in a male prison. So if you're going to do something with women, make sure it is realistic that they are there to start off with, but also go and read other people who've done it well. Yeah, the best writers are always the best readers.
Yeah, what she said.
Good answer.
I would say get lots of women to read it as well. Women of different types. Do the research. Know it could happen. If you're writing a story about humanity, the gender becomes less of an issue as you tell the story, so long as it could happen. But then ask many women, is this how this woman might be realised in an acceptable way? Don't go and ask a load of men.
No.
God. No, which is not to denigrate men, they have their own opinions, but if you want to hit the right note.
If you want to hit the right note, ask a woman.
Ask a woman, yeah.
Always, like generally in life about anything.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Alice.
Great, thanks, Jackie. Thank you for stepping into the breach and doing that for us. That's been really great. And thank you for all your contributions this week. You've been a wonderful chair of many panels. And there have been huge amounts of love for you in the YouTube chat room, I know. So
yes.
And thank you to everybody for your questions. It's been one of the fantastic things about this festival. This is the reason we decided to do it the way we have, because our contributors are sitting here on a Zoom meeting and we're streaming it, or rather our lovely producer, Jamie Lamb, to whom enormous thanks, is streaming it onto YouTube for us. And we wanted to do it that way so that you could interact and ask questions. So thank you very much to everybody for tonight's questions, and to the people who've been here all week for your ongoing questions. It's really, really good of you to interact with us.
Alice, can I just come back, because I can see it coming through on that, and people are just so thrilled by the festival and how it's taken place this year, and the voices that are saying, we look forward to welcoming you to Aberystwyth. So that's lovely.
That's wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for that. And we very much hope to be there. So now it only remains for me to thank our two wonderful authors for this evening, Cathy Ace and Gail V. Williams, for a hugely entertaining event. To thank our sponsors, Aberystwyth Town Council and Literature Wales, for making this whole festival possible. And thank you to you, our audience, for watching this and all the other events this week. I hope you've enjoyed them all as much as we have, and that you will come along next year when, fingers crossed and viruses allowing, we'll be in Aberystwyth. Meanwhile, it's good night from Cathy, good night from Gail, and good night from me and Jackie. Noswaith dda i chi gyd.